Hi, it's Matt. So today in this video we will take a look at what we call responsible engineering. And responsible engineering, for the purposes of our course, it contains two broad categories, and that's ethics and impact of engineering. And we'll look at each of those. We'll get an introduction to each one of those in the rest of this video. Just for your information, this is the first semester where I'm referring to both of those things under the umbrella term of responsible engineering. I usually just refer to them as ethics or impact. So throughout the semester you'll probably hear me use those two terms more often. But just know together they form the broader term of responsible engineering. And these two things, ethics and impact, will be a big part of what we do throughout the semester. We'll look at a number of case studies involving ethical dilemmas and ways that engineering impacts our everyday life and how it could impact our lives in the future. They are important topics, and we will be talking about them throughout the semester. I think it's one of the things that makes this class fun, because we can talk about all kinds of different things as long as they fit under those categories of engineering, ethics, and impact, and that is a large number of subjects. So we have a lot of flexibility in that area. Feedback and class discussion is always essential for these discussions and these topics. It's no fun if I just tell you what I think, because there's 20 of you in the class. It's really prefer to know what you think about these things. So we should have a back and forth. And if I say something, if I express an opinion and you disagree with it, please disagree. Let me know. Raise your hand. Whatever you want to do. That's what makes class rewarding. So without further ado, I'll share my screen for the rest of the presentation. This is a new presentation. I put it together over the past couple days, so it may be a little awkward in places, so if you could bear with me on that, I appreciate it. So I will present. Responsible engineering is definitely, those two words put together are open to interpretation. So to try and just get started on what responsible engineering is, I pulled out my old dictionary, and this is actually my dictionary. I took a picture of it. Haven't used a paper dictionary in several years, although I do use them online every day. But it was kind of fun to get this old one out and take a look. So here's the definition for responsible. Responsible can be an adjective, and then there's adverbial versions of it as well. So let's just take a look at some of these definitions. As an adjective, it can mean expected or obliged to account for something to someone, answerable or accountable. So it's a person who's accountable for something to someone else, usually a manager or somebody, another person. Involving accountability, obligation, or duties, a responsible position. That can be charged with being the cause, agent, or source of something, the moisture that is responsible for the rust. When I read this, what I noticed is that responsible can apply to a person, and it can also apply to anything else, an object, in this case moisture. So it doesn't have to be a person. A thing can also be responsible for something, according to this definition. Number 4, able to distinguish between right and wrong and to think and act rationally, and hence accountable for one's behavior. So the person is able to distinguish between right and wrong, so you have to have that capability in the first place to be responsible. You have to also be able to think and act rationally. So if for some reason you're irrational, you are not able to be responsible, according to this, as I read it. And hence, because you are able to distinguish between right and wrong, and you are able to think and act rationally, therefore you are accountable for your behavior as a responsible person. Number 5, readily assuming obligations, duties, etc. So a person who is willing to accept responsibility or new duties and obligations, that person could be called responsible. Okay, moving on. Engineer. What is an engineer? The first definition, it's now rare, is a person who makes engines. So I guess in the early days of automobiles, if you made engines, you were probably called an engineer. Number 2, a person skilled or occupied in some branch of engineering, such as a mechanical engineer. A person who operates or supervises the operation of engines or technical equipment in a locomotive or also submarines. They also call them engineers. A specialist in planning and directing operations in some technical field. Okay. A skillful or clever manager. That's an interesting definition. I had not thought of engineer in that way. Number 5, in the military context, a member of a military engineering unit trained in the construction and demolition of bridges, roads, airfields, etc. And then there's a transitive verb version of it: to plan, construct, or manage as an engineer. Number 2, to plan and direct skillfully. So this VT here, that means verb transitive, which that transitive means that the verb must have an object. So you have, in this case, in these definitions, you have to engineer something, and that's the object. Okay, so those are our definitions. And then engineering is right below it. So the first, or one of the most applicable definitions for us, a person skilled or occupied in some branch of engineering. Yeah, there's more interesting things here. They said skilled or occupied. When you read definitions in dictionaries, you can be sure that the people who wrote it spent a great deal of time choosing the words carefully. So if they say skilled or, and they try and make their definitions as concise as possible as well. So if they chose to use skilled or occupied, there's a reason why they use both of those words. So skilled, to me, that means maybe somebody who has an education. Could it be called an engineer, even if they're not currently occupied in engineering? Or occupied. So that could mean someone who maybe does not have an engineering education, but is occupied in some branch of engineering. That person could also be called an engineer. All right, so engineering. This is interesting. So engineer, what is engineering according to Webster's? 1A, the science concerned with putting scientific knowledge to practical uses, divided into different branches such as civil, electrical, mechanical, chemical, etc. So the science concern, engineering is a science, and it's concerned with putting scientific knowledge to practical uses. So if I'm reading that correctly, scientists make discoveries, and engineers apply the scientific discoveries to practical uses. So engineers are scientists who use scientific knowledge in practical ways. All right, a little long-winded. So I put together this definition based on the previous definitions. A responsible engineer is a person who applies scientific knowledge in a practical way while thinking and acting rationally, distinguishing between right and wrong, and accepting accountability for his or her choices and actions. I did my best with the definition. As I said, I think these words, responsible engineer, can be interpreted in many ways, and that's part of what we'll talk about throughout the semester. So responsible engineering has two main components. I think I mentioned that. Ethics. Ethics, which could be called a personal or official system of moral principles. In other words, doing the right thing. Impact of engineering. How engineering affects daily life today and in the future. So we'll look at each one one at a time. So, I would recommend pausing the video here and reading this on your own, but I'll go through it quickly now. Imagine that you've been hired and you're to work on an engineering team, and that team has been working on months on a new product. The managers of the company are paying close attention to your team's progress, and they are eager for the project to be completed. However, one dreary Monday morning, you come into work and you discover that you made a mistake in some engineering calculations that you did months ago. These calculations were then forwarded to the other people in your team, and they did more engineering work on top of your calculations. So they depended on your calculations to be accurate, and then they did more engineering work on top of it. For that reason, if there's a mistake in your calculations, it could affect the work that your colleagues have done subsequently. So you check and you recheck your work, and by noon that day, you're sure that your original calculations have an error. The product recently passed prototype testing and it worked flawlessly, and the production department is already installing machinery to begin production. So if you report your concerns to your colleagues and you tell them you're afraid that you made a mistake, it could cause weeks of delay, it could cost the company a lot of money, and it could frustrate your colleagues. If you report this possible mistake or what you believe is a mistake, you will not be a popular person at the company. You will hold up the progress towards producing this product. You put a great deal of thought into it, had some anxiety, and you feel you have two choices. You could tell someone about your mistake and accept whatever consequences follow, or you can say nothing and hope no one notices and nothing bad happens. Okay? So remember, the product went through prototype testing, it passed it with flying colors. So your mistake may not have any consequences. The product could go to production, it could be used by customers, they could be very happy with it, and nobody might ever find out. On the other hand, just because it passed prototype testing doesn't mean it will hold up in a real world environment. So it's possible that your company could manufacture and sell several thousands of these products, whatever they are, and later on be faced with a slew of complaints from customers. And then there will be an investigation, and then they could find your mistake. And if that happens, you're really in trouble. So this is your dilemma. And here's your attendance question for today. There will be a quiz on Canvas, so you can answer this question there. What factors might discourage you from alerting your colleagues to a potentially serious error like this one? So I'm not asking you whether or not you would speak up. I assume you all want to do the right thing, but there could be some factors that could discourage you from alerting your colleagues to an error like this. If you could spend about 5 minutes thinking about that, you can use the information that was provided in the mini case here. You can also use your imagination and just think what it would be like to be in such a situation. What types of factors could potentially make you decide to not report the error? Okay, so that's the attendance question. Dealing with trade-offs. That's something else that's often faced in ethical situations. You may have heard companies say some things like, all of our products are as safe as they can possibly be. Or they may say, we never compromise on quality. Unless we have to. I think I have one more. Oh, there he is. He's shameful. Yeah, I'm just experimenting with these animations, so they may be a little bit corny in the beginning. Doing my best. So yeah, I think this is we see these phrases like this a lot where companies might say that the products are as safe as they could possibly be. No product is ever really as safe as it possibly could be. You could always make products safer, but there are trade-offs. You could make a product where it's guaranteed to never harm anybody. That product will probably have very little functionality. You can say you never compromise on quality. We hear that in marketing slogans, for example. But in reality, we compromise on quality all the time. We compromise on safety and on quality. As consumers, we do it in the choices we make, how we choose to spend our money, and engineers reflect those choices as well. So here's an example of a trade-off. Lighter cars are more fuel efficient, so there has long been a trend towards more fuel efficient cars. The government has also imposed emission standards which force manufacturers to innovate to make their cars more fuel efficient. And one example of that is the Ford F-150. This truck here on the bottom is a Ford F-150. It is the best-selling car in America and has been for a number of years. The Ford F-150 pickup. Since 2005, Ford has been building the F-150 with aluminum structural components. It makes the trucks lighter, and this makes them more fuel efficient. Instead of a large V8 engine, they can have a turbocharged V6, for example, and they can still get acceptable performance. However, there's a trade-off. Aluminum is more prone to corrosion. And I have an article. This is from Consumer Reports. It's from 2015, and it says aluminum is great when it comes to mileage, but it can cause some problems, as one reader found out. And they discuss the experience of a customer. I'll let you read this on your own if it's of interest. Who had some corrosion, premature corrosion on their truck, and it had to be repainted. and they had to complain to the factory to get it fixed at no cost or reduced cost. And there's a number of experiences like this. They're talking about corrosion. That's one trade-off of using aluminum structural components. Incidentally, Dodge and Chevrolet, the other two American makers of full-size pickup trucks, they have not followed suit, and they are still using steel frames. This truck here on top is a Dodge TRX. It's roughly equivalent to this one. I was on the Dodge and Ford websites, and it appears that Ford has decided to use turbocharged V6 engines in these trucks, even though it's a full-size truck, whereas Dodge is still offering a naturally aspirated V8. So that's something for consumers to consider. I think many truck owners really want a V8, and I think it's difficult for many of them to imagine a full-size pickup not having a V8, but the Ford pickups have turbo V6s. But if you want a V8, you'd have to buy the Dodge or a Chevy. I prefer Dodge, but that's just my opinion. Yeah, incidentally, I recently bought a new car. We have a Mazda CX-9, and we had a CX-9 before that from model year 2008. And the 2008 model that we had before put about 130,000 miles on it. That car had a V6, and it had all steel body panels. The new Mazda CX-9, which we got recently, has a turbocharged 4-cylinder, and I've noticed that some of the body panels, particularly in the rear, are not made of steel. They're made of a more flexible material. I'm not sure what it is, but it's definitely a lighter car using a smaller engine. So that trend is common in the auto industry today, but it has trade-offs, of course. Another trade-off of lighter cars is that they may be less safe in an accident. This is an extreme example. I have a little smart car here, and this is a full-size Humvee. When I was looking for evidence for smaller cars being more dangerous in accidents, I found a great deal of information from several years ago, but the most recent information almost all referred to this study from the Institute of Insurance Companies, I think it is. Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. Okay, and the representative quote that I found was, "A bigger, heavier vehicle provides better crash protection than a smaller, lighter one, assuming no other differences." Okay, so greater fuel economy with a lighter vehicle has trade-offs. You may experience corrosion, and the car may be more dangerous when it gets in an accident. Okay, so for ethics, there's a few assumptions that I just want to lay out in the beginning. Our discussions will be more productive. The first one is, for the purposes of class, I assume that you, as an engineer, genuinely want to do the right thing. We're not going to spend a lot of time convincing you to do the right thing and to make the right choices. I assume that all of you want to do the right thing, and I think that's an important prerequisite for our discussions. I think it's good to assume good intentions. If you disagree with somebody, it could be on an ethical issue, it could be on a political issue. I think the best thing to do is to assume good intentions on behalf of the other person. If you can't start there, it's very difficult to have a productive discussion. So that's what we'll do. The second set of assumptions: the border between ethical and unethical is often hard to discern, and that's why we talk about it, to gain more confidence in talking about these gray areas. Various stakeholders can perceive the same situation radically differently. Choices that appear unethical may turn out to be well thought out compromises, so keep an open mind before judging others. You get to see that in the truck example. If suddenly there was a large number of crashes where people died in lightweight aluminum vehicles, we may think that the engineers who designed those vehicles were unethical for designing cars that were less strong, or that were weaker, more vulnerable in accidents. But if we look closer, we may realize they had fuel standards that they had to meet by law, and that's why they chose aluminum. So, they had to deal with trade-offs, and the end result may appear to be unethical, but it could have a solid foundation. Even the most considered choices made by the most conscientious persons can be met with harsh criticism and unfair accusations. Personally, I think this is an important aspect of ethics, especially for students and for you as you enter the workforce. In my opinion, it's not enough simply to do the right thing, but I think it's important that people know you're doing the right thing. And I think it's important for you to take precautions to guard against unfair accusations. Being unfairly accused of some type of ethical behavior could be devastating to your career, to you personally. So we want to avoid that. And we can avoid it by taking some simple precautions, which we'll talk about. So this will be our approach to ethics in the class. This is certainly not a comprehensive list, but I did my best to get the main points. We want to gain comfort and confidence in discussing ethical questions and dilemmas. We will explore various schools of thought that aid in ethical decision making. We will gain practice weighing trade-offs. We will learn to identify and empathize with various stakeholders. We will try to understand how ethical people can make decisions that appear unethical or have unfortunate results. We will discuss precautions that you can take to protect against unwarranted accusations of unethical behavior. And we can develop habits that foster a measured approach to ethics. And for this point here, trying to understand how ethical people can make decisions that appear unethical, when I see that, what I think is, we should try and be fair to other people who may be accused of being unethical. There can be situations where several people are convinced that another person has acted unethically, and they may start to spread rumors or talk about that person, and that person may be put under a lot of pressure. Unless we have evidence of them acting unethically, even if other people think they were unethical, we should withhold, in my opinion, we should withhold judgment until we're convinced that that person actually acted unethically. And the reason for that is a bit of self-protection. Is, first of all, it's fair, but secondly, we ourselves could also become targets of unfair accusations. So, kind of what goes around comes around. So we want to be careful of that. Okay, now we can take a look at impact of engineering, the other term under the umbrella of responsible engineering. When we talk about impact for the class, we'll think of it in this way. How does engineering impact the lives of ordinary people around the world? The projects that you work on as an engineer could impact the lives of the people who choose to purchase your product or service, but they could also impact people who never decide to use your product or service. And there's some examples we'll look at shortly. Examples of impactful engineering. These are from the past or the present. Automobiles, nuclear energy, radio technology, the internet, aerospace, factory farming. This is a short list I just pulled off the top of my head yesterday. There are many examples of impactful engineering. And if you go through this list and you take a second just to think about how did the automobile impact our way of life? If you look at how we lived before automobiles, how we lived after, how did the automobile change our way of life? Nuclear engineering is a great example. It's impacted us in both positive and negative ways. It gives us clean and abundant energy without pollution, but it also produces a great deal of waste, which can be dangerous. And it also can be misused to produce weapons of mass destruction. So it has the potential to impact everybody on Earth, essentially. Radio technology covers a wide area of things. That could be a simple wireless radio or your cell phone. Cell phones also use radio technology. The internet, aerospace, factory farming. We don't have to talk about each one. But each one of these things has impacted our way of life. These are examples of developments in engineering that are ongoing currently. And I would encourage you to think about how they could impact the future of humanity. So I have a short list there: genetic engineering, space travel, autonomous vehicles, widespread surveillance, virtual reality, and artificial intelligence. We will talk about each one of these separately during the semester. We'll probably have a lesson on each one. So Yeah, what do we have next? Impact is fun because we can imagine what the distant future could look like. That's true. So when I think of impact, I think of engineering developments that are happening now, and I ask myself if those developments continue and they're productive and engineers make progress on genetic engineering or space travel, for example, how could that affect the way people live their lives in 50 or 100 years? It's impossible to predict the future, but we can think about it today. Pro tip, read science fiction. I started reading science fiction a few years ago and I've really enjoyed it. Uh, Many of the things that you read about in science fiction are happening now. Space travel, genetic engineering, autonomous vehicles, artificial intelligence is a big topic in the science fiction I've read. So the authors use their imagination and they think about how these things might look like in several hundred or even thousands of years distant from now. Yes, here's this is the Culture series by the author Iain M. Banks. It's might be as many as 10 novels. I've read 4 or 5 of them so far and have been really enjoying it. This is the first one, Consider Phlebas. It deals with space travel, artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles and autonomous spacecraft, genetic engineering for sure. It's all in there. So I find it interesting. If you have time, maybe during the break or something, you're looking for something to read, this could be a good choice. Yeah, so for impact of engineering, we will watch videos, we'll read articles, we'll do independent research. There will be at least one impact assignment. Class discussion is important. It makes class enjoyable, indeed. So this concludes our introduction to responsible engineering. There are upcoming lessons and discussions I have listed here. Ethical schools of thought is coming up next. There will be a separate video on that. And we'll look at each one of these things throughout the semester. There will be assignments for impact and for ethics and impact, one assignment for each at least, and probably smaller in-class assignments. I usually ask you to finish those within 15 minutes. I'm generally asking, you may watch a video and then I'll ask you for your opinion on the video or something that you learned. Short writing assignments. So that concludes our introduction. Ethical schools of thought will be coming up next.